Kakashi is undoubtedly one of the most normal Ito Junji works you'll ever see. This isn't really saying much, considering the man is famous for spirals consuming towns and holes in mountains that distort flesh, but the fact remains that, when compared to the rest of Ito's works, Kakashi is pretty damn normal. Does that then make this a lesser film than others based on some of his more bizarre works? Absolutely not. Kakashi is a ride, but it's a far more somber character piece than people might be expecting from the master of the bizarre. Let's delve into this one and take a look at why. Kakashi was released in 2001, making it over 20 years old now. It stars one of my favourite actresses of all time in the lead villain role, Shibasaki Ko, and it was directed by Tsuruta Norio, a man who has pretty much made a career of adapting famous horror novels and manga. Before this film, he was best known for his work on several Honton ni Atta films, as well as Ring Zero, Birthday. He was one of the forerunners during the 1990s and early 2000s of the Japanese horror movement, and in Japan he's known as one of the fathers or pioneers of J-horror, thanks to the influence his early works had. If you enjoy Japanese horror, there's a good chance at least some of the tropes you love were developed and popularized by this man. Now, when you add a director of such caliber to a story created by Ito Junji, you should expect some magic, right? How could things go wrong? Well, if you've seen any of the many Ito works that have been adapted to film, then you're no doubt aware that his work doesn't always translate so well to the big screen. They can be very hit or miss, and big-name directors with big-name actors doesn't always guarantee success. But as I said, Kakashi is certainly one of Ito's more restrained works, although the reason for that is, well, perhaps not because of Ito himself. It's important to note here that while Kakashi is based on Ito's work, it's not his story, strictly. It's based on several of his manga short stories, but it was written by Tsuruta himself, alongside a few other screenwriters who stepped in to help. Ito had nothing to do with the script, and his only real tie to this movie is that he wrote the several stories this was based on. Yes, several. In an interview before Kakashi's release, Tsuruta mentioned that he had been a fan of Ito's work since pretty much debut. He long wanted to make a film of one of his stories, but wasn't sure whether they would actually work well on screen. So, when he saw the first Tomie film, he was shocked that it worked so well. After that, more and more Ito works were picked up and made into movies, and Tsuruta grew more and more frustrated that he wasn't picked to direct one. And so, when the studio came knocking and asked him to adapt an Ito work in 2000, he jumped at the chance. Initially, he started work on a script to adapt the story Street of Gravestones. This story features the siblings Kaoru and Tsuyoshi, who go to visit Kaoru's friend Izumi. She moved to a new city and, as it turns out, when people die in this city, they turn into gravestones. At least, so long as they're not moved from the spot where they die. But Tsuruta struggled to adapt this into a script, and so he looked to other Ito works for inspiration. Another of the script writers suggested Scarecrows, another short story in a similar vein where, if a scarecrow is placed on top of a grave, it eventually begins to take on the appearance and perhaps even the personality of the person buried beneath it. When Tsuruta saw this script, he felt this was the direction he wanted to go. He could make something legitimately scary out of this idea, and so the two stories were combined. And, being such a big Ito fan, inevitably inspirations from other stories made their way into the film as well. But it was these two stories that were taken, blended, and developed into the movie we now know as Kakashi. It was produced in conjunction with a Hong Kong studio, and so Tsuruta tried to make this film a little faster paced and snappier than his previous films, fearing that a Hong Kong audience might get bored with it otherwise. Ironic, considering that a common complaint about this film is that it's too meandering. But, nevertheless, Tsuruta also took inspiration from 1970s and 80s American horror films, particularly those by John Carpenter, to make for an interesting mix of inspirations, to say the least. But what is the story of Kakashi? Without going too deep into spoiler territory, Kakashi is mostly a character piece that follows the story of Kaoru, one of the lead characters from Street of Gravestones, as she looks for her missing brother, Tsuyoshi. Inside his apartment, she finds a letter from Izumi, a former friend of hers who, it seems, was in love with her brother. This letter has come from a place called Kozukata Village, and so Kaoru sets off to see if her brother is really there. Yet immediately upon arriving in the village, she's greeted by numerous strange sightings. There's a poster of a missing Chinese woman, who she soon sees playing with a little girl in a field. There's a man loading numerous scarecrows into his truck, and an old woman nursing a baby scarecrow in a pram. Seems she has arrived just in time for the annual Scarecrow Festival, whatever that is. But clearly the place is a little creepy and not quite right. Kaoru eventually finds her way to Izumi's house, but she's not there. Her parents claim that she's in the hospital, and they don't know anything about her missing brother either. They're also acting incredibly strange in general, just like everyone else in this weird village. But they agree to let Kaoru stay the night, seeing as her car has broken down and it's going to take some time to fetch help. The story proceeds pretty much as you would expect it to. You're unlikely to come across any surprises here. Kaoru eventually figures out what's going on with Izumi, the truth behind her brother's disappearance, and unravels the mystery behind the village's strange Scarecrow Festival as well. It's all related, of course, and it seems the villagers truly believe that they can bring the dead back to life through these scarecrows. But can they? And perhaps even more importantly, should they? As I mentioned earlier, one of the common complaints I've seen about this film is that it's rather slow. This might be a bit jarring for Ito fans who are expecting some of his usual bizarre fare, but this is definitely more of a character piece, and less of a explore a strange idea to see where it goes story. While the Scarecrow Festival is what the film ultimately revolves around, all of that is still tied to Kaoru and her story. Her past, her present, even her future. Her relationship with her brother, which at times comes across as rather incestuous and was mentioned in press by Tsuruta as something that was definitely supposed to be a little creepy, and would have been more of a focus if they had more time, makes up the majority of the film. The siblings lost their parents and only have each other. Or at least, that's how Kaoru sees it, and she doesn't take fondly to her former high school friend falling in love with her brother, when, it turns out, she's kind of in love with him as well. This twisted, obsessive relationship with her brother drives the movie and leads to an ending that probably won't be too surprising for many. And without getting into spoilers, apparently the ending was originally going to be different, with the scarecrows in the village eventually taking over entirely, before spreading out into the world for a sort of scarecrow apocalypse. But they didn't have enough time or budget, so they had to scale back and cut it down to the ending we got instead. I don't know about you, but I'm ready for a scarecrow apocalypse at this point. That actually would have been neat to see. But instead, the ending is much more small scale and directly tied to Kaoru and her relationship with her brother, which, again, the director felt was an ideal ending to this character piece anyway. Overall, Japanese reviews haven't been especially kind to this movie over the years. Most declare it boring and slow, with little of value to an Ito fan. Others were disappointed because they were expecting something a little more bizarre and instead they got, well, scarecrows. And others, used to terrible Ito adaptions, got exactly what they were expecting. Another terrible adaption. One of the main criticisms, aside from how slow the film is is that the main character just isn't very interesting or relatable. As someone who did still enjoy the film otherwise, I agree. I enjoyed the film despite the main character, not because of her. For me, the inspirations from the 70s and 80s American horror films are pretty clear, and it's interesting to see it mixed in with a very rural Japanese horror story. You have a traditional Japanese village in the middle of nowhere, a creepy festival, and your usual long-haired Japanese ghost. But the mood and atmosphere surrounding all of this feels very much ripped from old American horror. The way it's framed, shot, and scored feels like you could very easily slot it into that era and it wouldn't be out of place at all. It's a combination that won't work for everyone, and clearly it didn't, but it's not something you see every day, and it worked well enough for me. I also enjoyed the slow pace of the film, and this gels with the rural setting very well. Everything seems to move much slower in the countryside, including time itself. You're not supposed to feel comfortable with this village and the people in it, but at the same time, you're not supposed to know why either. You understand that something is wrong, but you can't quite place your finger on it. I love something fast-paced and in your face as much as the next person, but sometimes I enjoy a slow, creepy build-up as well. The problem though is that, like many, I really didn't like the main character. She's incredibly hard to sympathize with, and by the end you realize she's not really that fantastic of a person either. She's obsessed with her brother to the point where she can't let him live his own life, and she can't live her own without him in it either. It's not only hard to relate to that, it's hard to cheer her on as well. When you sympathize more with the villain, well, it's hard to come back from that. To be fair, it's not like a main character has to be likable, but it does make this one a bit of a struggle when the film is literally a character piece centered around her. Ultimately, if you can dig this film up, as it's pretty hard to find these days, then yeah, it's definitely worth a watch. Not a lot of action takes place, but if you're in the mood to kick back and enjoy some atmosphere, you could definitely do worse than this one. It's not the best Ito film you'll ever see, but it's not the worst either. And that probably sums this movie up best. It's rather mid-tier in everything it does. Never amazing at anything, but not the worst you'll ever see either. But I'll always be dreaming about that scarecrow apocalypse that was sadly never to be. But what did you guys think of this one? Have you seen Kakashi before? Let me know what you thought of the film in the comments below, and I'll see you again next time.